Hello and welcome back to another video about how to program your own Discord bot in Python. So today we're going to take a look at how to do access control, authorization and error handling. And these topics are actually quite important once you start using this bot on a larger scale and more people get involved and start to use it. Like if an error occurs, you want to make sure that that error is handled properly. You also want to make sure that some commands are reserved for some roles. And you probably also want to make sure that some commands can only be executed in a certain context or by certain people. Fortunately, using the Discord PY API, it's actually quite easy to do all of these things. So let's just take a look. So let's start by defining a new event. This event will be an asynchronous function called onCommandError. And it will take a context and an error as input. So this function right here is something that the API expects. So it needs to be called onCommandError. And this function will be invoked every time that an error occurs in the program. So what we can do in here is just handle that error however we want, basically. Now let's just do this simply for now and just print the error to the person invoking a command. So we are going to do context.send and then just send the error. And we're also going to make a quick log of this. So let's just use datetime for this and print that an exception occurred, so we can find out later what actually happened if we look at the logs. And we need to import this datetime object. There we go. Okay, so this is actually all there is to it. Essentially, this is a very sort of nucleus of handling errors in using the Discord PY API. Like I said, you can of course do something else more sophisticated. You can, for instance, if instead of just printing the error to the user, you could do something like if the error is an instance of commands dot, let's say, command not found. So if the exception that is raised is that the command is not found, somebody wrote ping in a wrong manner, let's say, there is no command with the name they give, then we can go into this if statement case and do whatever. Like you could say wait ctx.send and then some custom error message here, right? You could do whatever you want, basically. But let's just settle with the simple case for now. So let's try and test this out real quick. So I'm going to run the bot locally for now while we develop, and we can always go back to hosting it on Google Cloud if we want, like I showcased in the other video. But for now, running it locally is fine. So python bot.py. And it will start. There we go. Now, if we go to Discord right here, we can actually test this out. So let's write something that doesn't exist, like something like this. And as you can see, it replies with command is not found. And if we write something else, it will write this instead. But we can still do ping like we could before. So that's just one example of an exception getting raised, and we can see that it's printed to standard output as well. The timestamp we sort of added, and then the type, the error, and then the error message, which is something that is sort of made by the Discord PY API. This is not something we wrote ourselves. So as you can see, the error had this type. And if you go to the documentation, which I'll put down in the video description, a link to all of these, you can see a list of all the exceptions that exist in this API. So if you want to sort of do manual handling of all of these, you could make an if statement, let's say, for those you want to handle. This is the hierarchy as well. So yeah.
Oh, one more thing you've got to mention. If you want to handle an error from a specific command, then you can make a new asynchronous function and then decorator with the same name as a command, and then dot error. And this will be invoked when an error occurs in that command. So that's also an option you have.
Okay, Arnold, thanks for that. I guess that's true. Alright, let's now take a look at how to do authorization and access control. So let's say that the ping command that we executed before is something we only want to allow in private messages to the bot. So not something you can use in the guild, like in the server. So basically what that means is that if we go back, we don't want to allow it being used in here, but if we write a message to the bot, then it should be possible. So let's try and do that. Now, using decorators, this is actually very, very simple. So let's start by, actually we already have the command down here, so this is where we need to decorate. So let's just add a decorator called commands and then DM only. And this is all you need to do. So from the external module, we had this command module, basically, submodule. And this DM only is a decorator function that exists in that module and is sort of exposed through this Discord PY API. And we can just use these to decorate our functions and make sure that they sort of are allowed to be used in a certain context based on what we choose. And there's a bunch of things you can choose in here. I'm not going to go through them all, but they're listed in here, basically. Like DM only, like the one we just used, guild only, is owner, is this as well, like a bunch of these we can use. I'm going to show you some more examples in a minute. Let's just go back real quick and try this out. This should actually work. Alright, so I restarted the bot, and let's try to write ping in here. And there we go, it replies with pung. Good. Now if we do it in here instead, it will reply with this command can only be used in private messages, which is a custom error message exposed through the API, or defined by the API, which was something that got sent right here. Because, like remember, as before, the onCommand error function will be invoked every time an error or an exception occurs. Cool. Now, let's take a look at something else. Let's try the other one real quick, like just to show you that it's very, very simple to sort of make this however you want. So using these decorators that already exist. So guild only, and then like making a new command, let's call it ding instead of ping. And this cannot be used in private messages. So let's try and run this instead. I just need to. There we go, I just terminated the bot. Let's try and run ding. And it replies with dung, but if you go to private messages, it will not work. So there you go, another quick example. So now let's try to make a command that can only be invoked if you have a certain permission. So I'm just going to copy this for now, down here. And instead of guild only, we want to give it some other decorator called has permissions. And this decorator expects you to give the permission or permissions in plural that you want to like sort of require in order to have the user being able to invoke this function. So let's say manage webhooks, let's say, right? That's one of the permissions that a certain user can have. It could also be administrator, it could be read messages. There's a bunch of these you can have. These are actually the same permissions that you saw in the first video, where you could define the permissions that the bot had when you invited it to the server, like remember the integer I talked about, which depended on which permissions it had. Anyway, let's call this command ibdev, and let's let the bot reply with ubdev. So if you had the manage webhooks permission as a user, then you can invoke this function. If you do not, then an exception will be raised. I can't remember what type it is exactly, we'll see that in a minute. So let's try this out. Alright, so back in Discord after restarting the bot, let's type ibdeb. And it replies with ubdeb. And that's because we actually have the manage webhooks permission because, well, we are the admin of this server. With the server owner, we have all the permissions. So actually, I can't really test this in a like quick way. I don't think I can remove my permission, and I don't really want to do that, quite frankly. Anyway, but it works, okay? Now let's try and look at an example where we sort of take a role into account. So let's make a new command. This time I'm actually gonna name it before we do anything else. So let's call this random range. And actually let's make this command take 2 arguments. And let's make it, you know, actually compute a random number in that range. So let's use random for this rand range. And then remember that every time you add an argument to a function, it will be like a string. So we need to cast it to an integer, which is what this rand range function expects. We also need to import it, of course. There we go. And, oops. And now what we can do is just print this result. So let's just do that, I guess. Away context.send random in range, and then let's, you know, I actually print the parameters as well. You know, why not? There we go. Actually, this is not inclusive, is it? I think it's exclusive. There we go. And then actually also the result, and let's just do it in bold like this. Result. And also let's actually do the stuff that's quite important. Now we want to only allow this for people who have a certain role. So let's say has role, and let's say the role that we require is let's say admin. So only an admin can actually execute this command right here. That's essentially what we stipulate by using this decorator here. Now you could also write the ID of the role, but it's probably easy, I guess, to use a string for the name. But just keep in mind that if you change the name of the role, then you have to also update this. Whereas if you make sure that you have the ID of that role, as long as you don't delete the role and create it again, it will stay the same. So yeah, I don't know, pros and cons. All right, let's test this out as well. So I did stop the bot before, so I can actually just start it right now. And let's go back to Discord and try this out. Rand range. No, random range was what we called it, right? Then let's give it some, yeah, I don't know, something like this maybe. And as we can see, we're not allowed to execute this. I mean, we are kind of an admin because we are the admin, like, we are kind of an admin because we are server owner of this Discord server. And that means we can do anything, really. We have administrative permissions, but we stipulate a role called admin. So we need to add that role. This is a role I defined earlier. But yeah, you know how to create a role. Just, you know, create a role and call it admin. And then give it to yourself. And there we go. Now we should be able to actually execute this command. And there we go. Random int in range. It gave us a result. So as you can see, it does work. Now another thing you could do, if we go back here, is instead of has role, you could say has any role, and then you could give it a list. No, actually, not a list. It's just I think just a sequence here of like either strings or integers of roles that you allow. Let's say moderators can do this too. So if you're an admin or if you're a moderator, then you can execute this command. I'm not going to test this out because it's, you know, almost the same as before, but you get the idea. So that is also an option you have. Okay, so one last thing I want to show you is just, let's update this terminate command with a decorator called commands, and then is owner. So we only want to allow ourselves, the owner of the bot, to terminate the bot, because it's a little bit annoying if somebody else can actually terminate it because they cannot start it again. It's the one hosting the bot who can start it. So I think it makes sense to only allow that person to terminate it as well. But it of course depends a lot on the context. But this is actually all you need, because what this does is that it will sort of look at the ID of the person using, like invoking the command, and it will try to match this ID with the ID of the creator of the bot. And it can actually fetch this automatically from Discord server. So this should actually work. So let's try this. Okay, so let's try to write terminate. And let's see if it works. It does work. So it passed the test, and that's because we're the owner of the bot. Yeah, and real quick here at the end also, let's just notice that what we printed here is all the errors that we see here. They have like the missing role here. Here we had no private message only. And also, let's just try to invoke this command with, not the right arguments. So let's try to write random range and then 1 only. And then it will say, oh yeah, of course I terminate the bot. Remember to actually restart the bot if you terminate it. There we go. Let's try again. And as you can see, it actually replies with a meaningful error message. And looking at the terminal, you have this missing required argument error. So again, you can make a custom error handler for this, because like B is probably not really saying a whole lot. And also in another video, we're going to take a look at actually how to make a help message and use the built-in one and extend it. Because if you type help, you can actually see all the commands, but that's for a different video. Okay, so one last thing I want to show you before we wrap this video up is that you can also make custom decorators and your own predicates. So let's try and take a look at that. So let's start by adding another command here, client.command, and then we are going to make our own custom decorator, and let's call this check if lucky. This is just an example. So let's try to make a decorator function in a minute that will check if we are lucky, and if we are lucky, then we are allowed to invoke the command. If we're not lucky, then nope, you're not allowed to. Again, just an example. You can use this for some more meaningful context, I'm sure. Anyway, let's call this try my luck. And it takes a context as always. And let's just simply send to the person invoking or trying to invoke the command, you are lucky, pal. Exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. Why not? Okay, so this decorator is something we define right here. So just make a function, call it check if lucky. Of course, the name needs to match. And then let's say it has a chance of 50%. So let's just define a local variable like this. And it's something you can actually change here as well. You can write something else if you want. Right. Let's just define. So what you need to do is within this function, we need to return another function which returns true or false. So let's define a predicate function in here. Let's just call it predicate. And it's important that it takes a context, because yeah, I'll show you that in a minute. If random.random is less than chance, then return true. Actually, no, we can write this in a more neat manner. We can just return this, I guess, instead of, if it's true, then return true, and otherwise return false. This is much more concise. Okay. And then we need to return commands.check and then a predicate. What we have here is we are using the built-in function called check. This is something that's from the Discord PY API. And this function expects as an input a function which as an input takes a context and returns true or false. So you could do something more meaningful perhaps, where you actually take the context into account. And then basically, yeah, so that's the predicate function we return. We satisfy the sort of what the Discord PY API expects when you invoke this check function. And then this is something we then return down here. So here we call it check if lucky. In fact, what you could do, I guess, you could actually also just write this down here like so. This would also work. This right here, this would also work. But yeah, depending on like the context and how you want to write it, you got both sort of options. Let's just go with the other one. Actually, yeah, so one advantage of this is that if you do it this way, you can very easily just add arguments here, which is, you know, exposed here, and then you can actually use it within the predicate function as well, like we actually do. Whereas in the other way, you'd have to do the usual stuff with, I guess, like the partial module from a function from the functools module, I think it's called. If you want to add predefined arguments in a neat way, I guess this way is easier. Anyway, I'm rambling a bit here. Let's just try this out. There we go, and go back to Discord. If I can open up my browser, there we go. Let's call try my luck. Let's see what happens. Try my luck. Oh, we're lucky. That was cool. Are we lucky again? Nope. Okay. A few more times. And yeah, guess we're quite lucky. Or maybe not. Anyway, but it does seem to work. But yeah, I guess this will be it for this video. We've seen how to use the built-in decorator functions. And we've also seen how to make our own, permissions decorator function. And the gist of all of it is basically just that the onCommand error function. Well, it's actually not, yeah, well, it is a function, but you need to decorate it with this event. It's an event. This will be invoked every time an exception occurs. And you can handle the error however you want, basically. And as you can see, a lot of the stuff we need is already existing in the API, Discord PY API. I love saying that because it rhymes. So you can make use of this if it makes sense, otherwise you can just define your own. So I hope this helped you out, and yeah, if you liked the video, give it a like. If you disliked it, give it a dislike, and subscribe for more videos if you want to see more tips and tricks for Discord and other stuff. And I'll catch you in the next one.